Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us for Choose to Challenge, NAAIA's 2021 Women's History Month event. All guests are now entering for the session, so please give us a couple of minutes and the program will begin. Thank you. So, hello everyone again. My name is Margaret Red. I'm the Executive Director for NAAIA National, and I want to welcome each of you to our Women's History Month event. We're so very excited to bring this forward, this event to you. We'll be featuring 4 fierce women who are going to speak to our theme, Choose to Challenge. This is a history-making moment for Women's History Month, right? This is a month where we're celebrating the contributions of women across the globe and certainly in the US. And NAAIA wants to take this opportunity to do the same. We're actually making history a bit this afternoon ourselves in that we're featuring women from a broad spectrum, not just from the insurance industry. And you'll hear more about that later. But some of the things that these women have in common: phenomenal, bold, persistent, leaders, game changers, challengers, and much, much more. And I know you're going to hear a lot about that. So before we jump into the program, let me give you just a few tips that'll help make this process run smooth and awesome for all of us. Upon entry into the webinar, you'll be muted. We invite you to listen through your computer speakers or by dialing in. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box, not chat. And we'll be working through those questions at the end of the program. This session is being recorded. The recording will be shared via NAAIA's website. So, without any further delay, please allow me to introduce the moderator for this program, Ms. Erica Rivera. Erica joined State Auto Insurance in March of 2008 as the Director of Talent Acquisition. After serving in that capacity for a number of years, Erica asked to be transitioned to a role of Community Relations Officer. And then she held a number of positions with the company, and currently she is the leader for culture and inclusion for the organization. Erica currently serves on a number of boards, including the Insurance Agents of Texas, the Texas Risk and Insurance Professional Society, the National Invest Board, Lincoln Theater Board, Insurance Industry Charitable Foundation Advocacy Council, and she is the founder of the Harding University African American Alumni Association. So just like the other women that you'll be hearing from today, this is a phenomenal woman who doesn't know how to stop. She tends to always lean in, gives a new meaning to busy and productive and effective in everything that she does. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome and introduce Erica Rivera.
Thank you, Margaret. You didn't tell me you were going to say all that, but thank you.
We're talking
Thank you so
phenomenal
much.
women.
Oh, I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. It's morning here in Texas, and I think it's morning there where Inga is. But we certainly want to welcome you again. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "A woman is like a tea bag. You never know how strong she is until she's in hot water." And these fierce women before you today have all been in hot water, and some would probably say what felt like open flames. But it was another who said that pressure creates diamond and fire refines gold. Allow me to introduce to you our refined gold and precious diamonds on this panel with us here today. And I am so excited. I have been waiting as I look at these ladies' faces. I've been reading all about you. So I feel like we're all friends already. I feel like I've been waiting for years, but it's only been a few weeks in truth. So let me start out by reading some introductions. First, we have Dame Inga Bill. Inga began her career at Prudential Assurance Company, training as an underwriter specializing in international treaty reinsurance. Enjoyed a number of leadership roles within the industry before being announced in 2013 as the new CEO of Lloyd's of London, making her the first female CEO in the insurance market's 328-year history. I feel like raising a fist to you. Inga has been instrumental in the launch of Pride at Lloyd's, which is an internal LGBT employee resource group, and has supported the LGBT Insurance Network. She is chair of the HIV Commission, was recognized in 2020, just last year, as a Business Insurance Woman to Watch, and was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in the 2017 New Year Honors for Services to the Economy. Zing Shaw. Zing is the Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Marsh McLennan, being one of the first to lead significant companies and sports teams in the diversity and inclusion field. Ms. Shaw has been working in this capacity for over 10 years, so people in my space could really take a lesson from you. I'm going to be listening in close. Embracing challenging roles such as Senior Vice President of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Edelman, serving as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Atlanta Hawks, which is the first of its kind at an NBA franchise, another you go girl moment, and Global Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer for Starbucks Company, where she was instrumental in helping Starbucks to create a culture of inclusion, diversity, and equity. Now let's meet Amy. Amy Griffin is the principal attorney of the Griffin Firm PLLC. Amy made the brave decision to attend law school as a second career as a mother of two, once she realized the institutionalized racism that perpetuates the financial burden that being Black in America imposes. Love that sentence. The Griffin Firm is a business and estate planning firm that is committed to creating, protecting, and transferring wealth. Amy serves with her voice to supporting economic development as the General Counsel for the U.S. Chambers, Inc. and the National African American Insurance Association, thank you very much, and is the founder of the nonprofit, the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, which is squarely focused on bridging the racial wealth gap through competency and capacity building. And Jennifer Grasso is a sergeant with the Los Angeles Police Department, Hollenbeck Division Gang Enforcement Detail. The last 10 years of Jennifer's tenure were spent assigned to the Elite Special Weapons Tactic Team, which we all know as SWAT, the first and currently still the only woman to ever be selected for this coveted assignment. For over 25 years, Jennifer has been a leader in the Los Angeles Police Department, working in a variety of assignments to include patrol and gangs, field training officer, Metropolitan Division, and SWAT. And Jennifer, if you ever need backup, I feel like in my mind, I am fluent in martial arts and all kinds of tactical weapons. So just feel free to call on me if you need. So let's go ahead and get started today, ladies. And what I thought we would do is start out with a poll question, because we want you in your individual homes to participate in this as well. So the first question is, have you ever been the only in a situation at work? And it could be the only woman, the only man, the only person of color, the only person who thinks like you. Yes or no? Have you been the only in a situation at work? If you take a moment to submit your answers. All right, so hopefully everybody has had a chance to answer that question, and that's going to lead into our next question. 95% of people have felt like they have been the only, and that's why we're starting with such a rich question for all of you today. So here's our first question, and I think we'll start with you, Inga. If you could start by answering this question, and then everyone else, I'll call you in just to kind of help us flow. What, as we think about the challenges of being the only one and the fight against those internal and external obstacles, because we can get in our own minds at times that might keep us from moving forward. What is it about your background or upbringing that motivates you and inspires you to choose to challenge? Inga.
Well, I'm going to go way back to when I was a little girl, because this is important only because I think it gave me an independent streak that has helped me throughout my career. Yeah. And I haven't been afraid of challenging things for many decades now. And this was when I was a little girl, and I was the middle child of 3, and I had an older brother and a younger sister. Now, my mother was from Norway, and most people would have expected the children of someone from Norway to have white blonde hair. Now, you can see, if you're looking at the video, I've got gray hair now, but I was born with dark brown hair, and my brother and sister had white blonde hair, and they told me I was adopted. So from a very young age, despite my parents giving me as much love as they could and telling me you're not adopted, I felt I was adopted, and I was always playing on my own, and my brother and sister were together. So from a very early age, 5, 6, 7 years old, I was a hugely independent little girl. And I think that really impacted things later, because when I then started to working in the insurance sector, and I was a trainee underwriter, but I was in an office of 35 of us in London, and it was a big open plan office because it was a sort of live trading room. I was the only female out of 35 underwriters. Wow. So there I really felt like the only one. And I, to begin with, I behaved like the men because I wanted to so belong. And that, again, really influenced how I behaved, certainly for the first, say, 10 years of my career. And I'm not sure it then actually was a benefit, but maybe later on in the discussion, we can talk about how things changed and how I changed as a person and decided to be me and not try to conform to the others that were all around me.
Wonderful. So what it was about you is that you've always been this person who wasn't afraid to challenge. And let's hear from you next, Amy. What is it about your background or upbringing that motivates you and inspires you to choose to challenge?
My parents my father's still alive, but community activists, civil rights folks. It was not that we were from Massachusetts, so we were still compelled to be a part of the solution. When you see a need, meet a need. So it's not just enough to see injustice or even being able to squeak by. Yeah. But if you see a need, you need to be able to support. As my brother said, you need to build a path forward that's big enough to bring folks behind you.
Mm-hmm. I love that, building a path forward. And when you have that commitment, you kind of learn to bring others along with you as well. Jennifer, let's talk to you some. So tell us, what is it about you that motivates you and inspires you to challenge?
So for starters, I'd like to give a shout out to my mom. She was a strong single mother raising my brother and I, working several jobs, put herself through college, the first in her family to earn a bachelor's degree. And so growing up, I had a front row seat to her struggles, trials, tribulations, and how she never let it bring her down. She never let it impact our family. She provided for us the best we could. So as an adult, I drew on what I had learned from watching my mother. And then, of course, in my line of work, almost 26 years in law enforcement, I am very often the only woman in the room, whether it be in patrol, sitting in roll call, showing up to a radio call for service. Definitely in my 10 years plus in SWAT, I was the only woman. And now as a supervisor leading young gang officers, I'm, again, find myself the only woman. But I see it as a superpower because I feel like we bring something to the table that the men cannot. And, hopefully with my efforts and the efforts of the women on this panel and watching this conference, we can change that. And I think we'll all be a lot better off when there are more than just, one of us.
Yeah, it is the superpower because you really have to have that courage to stand on your own. And I think there's a quote that says, we are all born original, but yet sadly, most die copies. And in that copy, I thought about what Inga said about trying to be like the men. And so often that's what we do in order to try to fit in, but then you find your footing along the way. Zing, why don't you round us out with that? What is it about your background and upbringing that motivates you to challenge?
I love that question, Erica. I had a tough upbringing. My mother passed away when I was 16 years old, and I was left alone with a drug addicted father as an only child. And so I remember being 16, a junior in high school without a mom, and thinking about what's next. Is college even an option? And I remember speaking to a guidance counselor who told me college was not an option based on my life circumstance, and that I should really think about cosmetology school. I was talented when it came to dressing up and hair and makeup, and I could likely find a career in that space. And that didn't sit well with me in my heart, Erica. I wanted more for my life. I thought there could be more, but that was the option put in front of me. And I remember sulking after hearing that information in the hallway. And a woman, Miss Nettie, she was the janitor in my local high school. I didn't know her. I just knew her name and saw her often mopping, keeping our school tidy, and just keeping things afloat for us. And she looked at me on that particular day. I guess she saw sadness in my eyes, and she pulled me to the side and she said, "Let me share something with you." She said, "If nobody in this world bets on you, bet on yourself. Bet on yourself." And in that moment, I mustered up the strength and I applied to colleges, not knowing where the money would come from, not knowing how to go about the process. But I landed myself at Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, and didn't pay a dime for school because my grades were good. And, I went on to achieve other degrees. I have a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania, and the list goes on. But I think the key takeaway is during my upbringing, the lesson that I learned is if nobody bets on you, bet on yourself.
I love that. If nobody bets on you, bets on yourself. And I'm thinking about that janitor. And sometimes we don't take the time to get inspiration from unusual resources. We have to be prepared to get that. So we could spend a long time on that question alone, but I want to go on to this next question because I really love this one. And Zing, since you're already talking, we'll start with you. How does one effectively leverage position and be a wedge to ensure that if and when the window of opportunity closes, because sometimes it does, other women continue to have increased opportunities for growth and success?
It's a great question, Erica, because, the window of opportunity may close for you, but that's an individual opportunity. I think what we have to do is recognize that even if something is not immediately available for us, the actions that we take are being watched and mirrored by others to follow, right? So we'll use Dr. King as an example. He had a dream about equity and equality, and he believed that Black children and white children would one day hold hands and get along. He even said many times, I may not get there, I may not see it, but I'm going to still teach and show others how to mirror these actions so that for generations to follow will be able to experience all of the benefits that my struggles have, that materialize from my struggles. And so I think about the same thing. I don't worry about immediate doors shut in front of me. That happens a lot. As a diversity and inclusion practitioner that is really trying to bring new insights and new ways of working and thinking to big corporate organizations, oftentimes there are doors that are slammed in my face and mountains that I have to climb and struggles that I endure. But I think about my children. I have 3 very small children. And I think about the possibilities for their life and the kids that they are in school with. And I can't stop this work because of an opportunity for me. So the key takeaway for everyone is don't worry about your individual journey. Think about what it will do for the greater good in the long term.
I love that. Not worrying about your individual journey and the greater good. And something else that you said is that you know, people are always watching. And I thought about that. My daughter has turned me into a Hamilton musical fanatic, but that line, history has its eyes on you, and we all have an opportunity to make a difference. Jennifer, let's go to you next with that question. How does one effectively leverage and be a wedge when doors close so that you can kind of bring others along?
So I think we have to be the change that we want to see. And so just because a door may have been closed in your face, I know me personally, I feel obligated to make it easier for the next woman that's coming behind me.
Mhm.
And if we're going to affect change, we need to be fierce. We need to be aggressive. We need to not take no for an answer.
Mhm.
There are so many people working against us, putting obstacles in our paths,
Yeah.
and we have to work that much harder to clear the way and, you know, reach back and invite those women that are coming behind us. Come on, there's plenty of room for you up here. Please come join me. And, you know, the fact that we might not get there, you know, that's mildly interesting. Our job is to make this place better than we found it. And I know in my 25 plus year career, I can look back and see that it is much better, not just because of me, but because of the women that have come before me that were also pioneers. So just stick your foot in the door and don't let them close it on you.
Absolutely. Stick your foot in the door. And I love that idea about reaching back and pulling others along. I wear this bracelet that says, as I climb, I pull. And if we can all remember to do that, even if the door closes and you put your toe in there, at least you can allow that opportunity to introduce someone else. Thank you. Anyone else have anything you'd like to add to that? Inga, I saw you go off mute.
Yeah, I wanted to add something actually, which is at quite a corporate level. So in the UK, when I was the CEO of Lloyd's, the Bank of England, so that's the central bank for the UK, launched an opportunity for firms to sign up, and they were financial services firms, to sign up to a charter to improve the representation of women in the senior leadership teams of the companies. Now, what was so important about this was you signed up and then you had to put targets in place, and you had to effect executive remuneration if the targets weren't hit. That meant my team and my executives' bonuses were going to be impacted. And this was public. Now, I saw this coming along, or arriving, and I thought, I've got to take advantage of this. I first of all spoke to the chair of Lloyd's, chairman, and he said, there's no way we're going to do that, you see. And I thought, this is a battle. I've got to fight for this one, because I could see once I put that in place, they couldn't then take it away because it was going to be all public. So I did my utmost to fight and get the board, which were mainly men, I got them to agree that we did that for Lloyd's. And then we managed to make a huge difference. So that to me was an example when it just opened up, and I had to go out of my way to actually instill that and make it happen.
Well, and Inga, you just shared an example, another Hamilton example, but being in the room where it happens, lots of times when those decisions are being made, no one in that room is willing to speak up and push for something like that to happen. But because you were there, you were able to make that happen. So I applaud you for having that courage. Very good.
Add one little additional
Come
piece
on,
to
Amy.
that, is that it's the intentionality. It's
Yeah.
that not waiting for the door to open, but having everybody positioned so that when we're constantly looking to create doors or create openings or creating just that peak, so that we have folks in position that we can always be ready to propel them forward.
Absolutely. Being ready to propel them forward. And then on the opposite side, they have to be ready to step forward, right? Because there's nothing worse than opening the door for someone and them not taking advantage of that opportunity, either because of negative self-talk or allowing naysayers to get in their minds. And I think that leads us to our next question. Thank you, Amy. You didn't even know you were directing that. But our next question goes to those blockers and naysayers, and some would dare to say haters. So in this moment, and we're going to start with you, Zing, in this moment of intense awareness and change, what should we know about career blockers or naysayers?
You got to know that they're there. Even the people that smile at you, even the people that oftentimes appear to be helpful in some of these contentious situations that we often have to face at work. There are people who in their hearts and in their minds have the intention to ensure that this does not get off the ground. And it's almost like that old saying when your grandmother said, oh, you keep your friends close and your enemies even closer. There are some people that are keeping us closer to understand what our next steps are so that they can figure out how to stay 10 steps ahead and block along the way, appearing to be, you know, like one of those, all of these old sayings I love, a wolf in sheep's clothes,
Yeah.
things like that, right? So I think we as practitioners have to recognize that haters are there for a reason. They're there to make you sharper. They're there to ensure that you actually are staying ahead of your game and that you are bringing high quality work to the table at all times, that you have crossed your T's, you've dotted your I's, you are a subject matter expert. That's another thing. We have got to push ourselves to be real subject matter experts, because when naysayers come around, they are going to try to infuse every level and theory of doubt that possibly can be interjected into an exchange. And so if you're on top of your game, you would welcome those type of interactions, because you know that you're doing the right thing. It's like that other saying, you know, for those of you on the phone that listen to hip hop music, if you ain't got no haters, you ain't popping. That's good when people hate on you, you know. So I actually welcome it. It's fine and it's encouraged, because it just keeps me sharper.
I love that. Everything has a purpose, even haters. So I love that. Anyone else want to add to that? Great points.
Well, I just want to say, sometimes it's sad, I know, but sometimes the blockers can be right at the top of an organization. But I think you're absolutely right, Zing, when you say you've got to know who they are. And I have to say, I was totally shocked once. I guess many of people, if you're from the world of insurance, you'll know the IIS, the International Insurance Society. And I think every 2 years they would have a massive conference. And one year it was in London. And I was speaking on the panel with many other, and I won't name them, many other, except they were all male CEOs of insurance companies from across the world. And right at the end, the facilitator of this panel said to us, and we didn't know he was going to ask this question, but he said, if there's one thing you want to change going forward for the insurance sector, what is it? And I just suddenly thought, right, I had the brochure of the conference in my hand, and there was a photo on there of all of the sort of board of the IIS, all the decision makers. And I just picked this up off my lap and I went, this is what we need to change. There are hardly any, I can't even remember, there might have been one woman, and I don't think there was a black person on there. There might have been one. I said, this is what we've got to change. This picture of insurance is not good, and we have to have a diverse picture going forward. And I said that. Now, after that appearance, I had one of the male CEOs who's responsible still for one of the major insurers in the US go to my chairman at Lloyd's and tell him that he needed to shut me up because I was talking about diversity too much. I was blown away, totally shocked, and thought that guy, and as I said, I will never name him, that guy is the biggest blocker that organization now has, and he's the top CEO of the whole group. Wow. So knowing who you've got to take on in some of this is really, really important. And I knew exactly now where I had to position him as we launched some of the new stuff we were doing in insurance and getting a real focus on diversity and inclusion and everything. I knew exactly where my battle was with that company, actually.
Yeah. Know where your battles are, know who they are. I mean, you have to be aware in order to know how to prepare, because I think that's a rhyme. I didn't even try to do that. But I think it's important that we really understand who the blockers are, because if you go around oblivious, you'll never be able to make the difference and challenge where you need to challenge. Jennifer, I think you were about to jump in there.
So what I was going to say in my personal experience, and I'm sure it's the same with the other panelists and maybe the women listening out there, early on in your career, you might not appreciate the blockers. You just know that there's constantly people kind of raining on your parade, if you will. But as you experience these situations more and more, you begin to realize, at least I did, that they are what have made me stronger. They have forged my character. And so now that I look back, I don't know if grateful is the right word, but I appreciate the fact that I faced these trials along the way, because they've made me sharper. They've made me better. I know I'm stronger than probably most of the men that I've ever worked with in my career because of what I've experienced. I haven't had doors open for me. I've had them shut in my face. And so, although it might be hard early on in your career, just know that with each encounter that you have with one of these blockers, with one of these haters, just internalize it and make it your fire within, to kind of push ahead. And like the other women have said, I mean, now you look back and you're like, wow, I'm here because I had to fight that much harder to get here. And so someday you'll look back and like I said, I don't know that grateful is the right word, but you'll appreciate the fact that these people didn't make it easy for you.
Yeah, I love that. Your tests create your testimony, and that's how you are able to help guide other people. And I love that you said you have to make it your fire, the fire that really drives you forward, because those blockers can get you inside your own head, and then you start to doubt yourself. So love that.
Yeah.
Amy, did you want to add?
I did want to say, and you were about to say it, is that we know that there are blockers. We know that there are naysayers. If we look at Zinga, how she took that information of, your college is not for you. So we hear that all along the way. But what's really important is to have those cheerleaders. Right. So that we need to create our own circle of support. So it's like, no, we know that, and we should count on the energy that's going to be a blocker, but build on the support systems that we have in place. We have that right. We have the responsibility, right? It's not necessarily our family, but we can create that circle of support that will help when we get those things to balance it out. Yes, we can encourage ourselves, but we also got a sisterhood that we can build on.
Absolutely. Creating that village. And I love that, when having your cheerleaders, and you can tell the mark of a leader by the people with whom they choose to surround themselves. So take the opportunity to create a positive board of directors. I love that, Amy. Thank you. So let's go into this next question. And I'm going to I think I'll put this out to all of you as well. So talk to us about the best and worst time of your professional life. And you could probably go on and on this one, but why don't we start with you, Jennifer? Talk about the best and worst time of your professional life.
So I'll start with the worst. And that was my efforts and attempts to break into the male-dominated SWAT team. And you want to talk about haters. I had haters on the SWAT team that didn't think that a woman belonged, haters on the department that didn't think women belonged, haters outside the department. And it was very, very difficult. A lot of negative media attention. My own union came out and spoke against the idea of lowering the standard and allowing a woman to be part of the team. But they were being fed a narrative by the people within the team that didn't want me to be a part of it. And so I prepared like I've never prepared for anything in my life. I was competent, I was capable, I was confident, but what I didn't anticipate were the obstacles that were going to be put in my way on this journey. And so it was very, very difficult. I questioned my decision-making, like what was I thinking? Why am I doing this? Will they even accept me once I get there, if I'm fortunate enough to make it? Yeah. And it was tough. Even after I did complete the 3-month selection and was brought onto the team, I'd say the first couple of years were very, very difficult. I felt like an island. And those that did support me, they would do it privately, maybe on the way home, a phone call, hey, you did good today, but nobody was willing to hang themselves out publicly because it would have been unpopular. And then transitioning from the worst part to the best part was, a few years later, when I think they realized, in spite of all their efforts to sabotage me, to prove that I was not worthy, I think they realized they had to eventually that I was doing just fine and that I was actually contributing. And they began to see me not as different than, but as part of. And so out of the worst time of my career probably came the best time of my career. And it's kind of odd to look back now and realize that those same men that did everything they could in their power to keep me out, once they gave me a chance, which is really what all I was asking for, they accepted me. And then that became the best part. I never forgot, how I was treated and the things that they did. And actually, as I was leaving, I made sure to remind them of what they had done, and that they should not do that to the next person. Allow the process to play out. Don't stand in the way. and, you know, encourage and inspire and motivate these other women to come up behind, because it's just going to make them that much better. I mean, diversity, no one can argue, it makes us better, it makes us stronger, it makes us more nimble. And so that was both the worst and the best time of my career.
Did you notice that any of them may have had a change of heart as a result of the experience with you? And did you notice any changes in people for the better?
For sure. I had one of the guys who I like to refer to as a caveman, because he was extremely primitive in his thinking. And I mean that almost as a term of endearment, but just really had not evolved or progressed like in his thinking, and was hired like in the late 80s. And so he was, you know, kind of ancient as far as the department was concerned. But he, as I promoted out of SWAT, because I'm now a supervisor and I had to leave that assignment, he thanked me and told me how I opened his eyes. He never imagined, based on everything that he knew to be true and righteous, that a woman could perform in that capacity. And he said, I value your being here, and I wish you weren't leaving, because you bring something to the table that the rest of us cannot bring. And so, you know, he encouraged me to stay, but I was ready to move on and kind of try new things and share what I had learned with young officers on the department. And he wasn't the only one, you know, he was just the most articulate, but a lot of the men shared that with me. And there were certain situations they would specifically say, hey, put Jen in there, you know, let Jen talk to this person, let Jen grab the kid when we step inside. You know, even though I'm not a parent, but I was always like, they saw that softer side of me, that side that was more willing to communicate, take my time, exercise patience. So I think definitely there was some value, and, you know, hopefully while their minds are, you know, still fresh with what I brought to the table, another woman will try and succeed, and it'll be a little bit easier for her.
Yeah. I love that. I watched a video about you. I think it was a video tribute, and saw several of your fellow officers talking about what you bring to the table. And one of the things that I pulled out is that you brought something they didn't realize that they needed. And I think that happens in those situations. Let's go on to you next, Inga. Tell us about the best and worst time of your professional life.
Well, I'm going to start with the worst first, just because that was earlier on in my career. I was in London at the time, and I'd been working for about 9 years, I think, at this stage, as I said, in this very, very male environment, and trying to be one of the men. And drinking alcohol was a big part of the culture in the insurance market in London, perhaps still is to a certain extent. But then it was a really big part. This was in the 80s. And I was becoming one of the lads, one of the guys. We went down to the pub. You know, I would drink as much beer as they did, just had to keep up with them. And I suppose things were going along swimmingly. I didn't really realize how much it was eating away at me. And then one particular incident happened in the office. We were hosting a series of cocktail parties actually in the office, which was all this big open plan office. And it was to celebrate or to watch the World Cricket Championships. Now, not many of this audience might understand or appreciate cricket. It's not my favorite sport, but a lot of the men in the London insurance market love to watch it. And sometimes the matches, you know, one match can last 5 days and things like that. So it's not very fast moving. But we had a whole series of cocktail parties watching the cricket because it was taking place in the Caribbean. And we decided to have a Caribbean theme, and we had posters from the Jamaica Tourist Board, because the manager of the office was married to someone who worked at the Jamaican Tourist Board, and she'd got all these posters of advertisements for Jamaica. Now this, again, got to go back, this was the late 80s. Now the posters for vacations in the Caribbean in those days were pictures of women in bikinis, pictures of women in bikinis with wet t-shirts on, perhaps pictures of women in wet t-shirts without even bikinis on. I think you get the scene. That was how they advertised things. And so the office was covered in these posters, and these parties went over a series of weeks. So they were all around the office, and I just went along with it. I had to, or felt I had to. And then after the parties were over, the posters were still up all around the office. And so one Friday evening, I plucked up the courage and I went to see the manager, and I said, look, I think I've been very, very patient, but will you please take the posters down now? And he said, oh, Inga, you know, how could we have been so insensitive? Of course, I'll see to that. So I went home feeling really pleased with myself that I'd had the courage to speak out. I came back into the office on the Monday, walked in through the reception, saw that the posters weren't up on the walls, turned the corner, and my workstation was covered and wrapped up in the posters, like a birthday gift.
Wow.
Chair, everything. I was so furious. I walked out of the office. I didn't speak to anyone. I just walked out. And these were in the days before we had cell phones, no mobile devices. I went home. There weren't many people in the office, and nobody knew what had happened to me. I just, as far as they were concerned, and my manager, I hadn't showed up for work that day. So I got calls, and for I think maybe 4 days, my manager phoned my home phone, left a voicemail, as I said, no mobile devices in those days. On day 4, I decided to phone him back. And I said, look, I'm not coming back to work. Because to me, this was the utmost, this was awful. And it was almost as though it was the straw that broke the camel's back. I just had enough of this. And I didn't know what I was going to do. But as far as I was concerned, I was never going to work in insurance again in my entire life. Mm-hmm. I packed a rucksack. I left all my belongings with a friend, and I got on a plane and I went traveling for a year. So it did actually turn out to be a pretty good thing for me because, as you can tell, I came back to insurance. But that to me was the time I so despised the world of insurance. I so despised the chauvinism. I thought, this isn't for me. I've got to go off and clear my head. So that was one of my really low points. Sure. Then fast forward many years, and I'd had great opportunities, gone to the US, gone to France, to Germany, and now I'd been offered a role to take over Converium, the company was called at the time, and it was in dire straits. The CEO had been fired a year ahead. It had lost all its financial strength ratings from AM Best, from S&P's Moody's. It was a disaster zone. Market cap had fallen through the floor. Shareholders very, very unhappy. Clients disappearing. Employees desperate, not knowing what to do. And they asked me if I would take over as the CEO. And I thought, wow, this would be my first CEO role of a publicly listed company. And I'd never even lived in Switzerland, so I didn't know anything about really the culture or anything. But I thought, well, what do I do? Shall I do this? Mm-hmm. And at the time, GE had sold its insurance businesses to Swiss Re. Mm-hmm. And there was the uncertainty of what would my future be with Swiss Re in that acquisition versus, well, what would my future be if I take this on? And I actually decided to take the plunge and take this role on. Didn't really know what I was letting myself in for at all. Most scary opportunity I've ever done. But within a year, we managed to turn the company around. We more than doubled the market cap. The shareholders are all happy. We managed to keep all the clients, win new clients, keep the jobs for all the employees. And that to me was the absolute best moment, because I felt as though I just shaped this thing and brought it back to life. And so it was a very, very hugely satisfying task. So I think that maybe in years to come, I'll talk about something about Lloyd's, but I think Lloyd's is a bit too recent for me to really reflect, whereas that was some time ago. That was in 2006, 2007. So I can look back and think that was a really good moment for me.
Wow, those are two powerful experiences. And as I think about taking the plunge and not having that CEO experience before, did you experience what's called imposter syndrome, where you felt like, okay, somebody's going to find me out that I've never been a CEO before?
Well, do you know, at that time, I think it was my my naivety. I didn't worry about that.
Yeah.
I was so naive. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for. Mm-hmm. And suddenly I was having to do, live TV interviews. And because I was moving to Switzerland, they'd never had a female run a financial services company in Switzerland before. Mm-hmm. So I was this weird thing then. And I was British, and they thought, what? And for them, I was young because I was 43. So all of this package, and I had played rugby, which again, for Swiss people, they thought was completely nuts. So I was this curious, exotic beast to them. And I got lots of attention. And you know what? Because I was so naive and I was so open and transparent with people, I think I got accepted in a way that I perhaps might not have done if I'd come in with the arrogance or the belief that I knew all the answers. And I somehow didn't. And I think it was that actually people warmed to me. And so I felt I got their support. And I had the courage and energy from them to keep moving forward.
It's fantastic. Margaret's going to kill me. I'm asking all kind of questions that's not even on the sheet. So I'm going to keep this moving. I could really talk to you all day. Zing, come on in here. Tell us a little bit about your best and worst.
I'll start with the worst, just like
Okay.
everyone else. It's good to end on a good note. But,
Okay.
you know, when you have a bad experience at work, a really bad experience, it's one of those things that stick with you. You never forget it.
Yeah.
And so my worst experience happened when I was 8 months pregnant with my first child. And it was a really exciting time in my life. And I was so just overwhelmed with joy of what's to come. And I'll never forget going to work on this one particular day, and a consultant who had been working on our team in our organization, so not a full-time employee, but a consultant that we hired, who had been on the project with us for several months. This is not a stranger or someone who I didn't know, came into my office and closed the door. And when he closed the door, I noticed that he locked it. And so a little bit alarmed, I asked him, did he need something? What was going on? And he began to sexually harass me at 8 months pregnant. And I felt in that moment helpless. I felt like I couldn't fight back. I mustered up the strength to get up, yell, and run out of the office. And I remember going directly to my boss and telling him what happened and saying, you've got it, this person has to leave. And my boss's reaction was, well, I have to hear both sides of the story first. Wow. So, I was demoralized. I went home that day, really upset, talked to my husband about it. The next day, my boss had made time that day to interact with the consultant, and the consultant didn't deny what happened. He just said that he was giving me advice for what I needed to do in order to deliver a baby safely.
He was giving you advice.
He was giving me advice, because he'd been there before, right? And it was sexual advice on how to prepare to deliver a baby naturally. And so we don't have to get into the details, but you can imagine what he said to me. Yeah. And my boss let him go.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking at that moment, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. I'm sitting here watching all of these women on television detail stories about different accounts of things that took place. And sometimes the stories were like almost unreal.
Yeah.
But then it happened to me. And I was like, me too. And so that was the worst thing that happened. But it just reminded me that we have to have empathy and also recognize that women are being attacked at work. In some instances. They are. Yeah. People are not coming up with these stories out of thin air. Absolutely. It happens.
It does.
The best thing that ever happened to me. So I took a job as the first chief diversity officer in the National Basketball Association. And I remember thinking, what's the first thing that I'm going to do to make a difference or impact the industry? And I recognized at the time there was not a huge showmanship for allyship of the LGBTQ community by the sports community. And for me, that was a missed opportunity, especially because in the city of Atlanta, where I am, there are a lot of sports organizations. There's the NBA, there's the NFL, Major League Baseball, WNBA, Major League Soccer. I mean, we pretty much have every sports property you can think of. And I wondered why none of those organizations ever marched in the Pride Parade in its 45-year history. And so I remember raising my hand and saying, we're going to be the first sports team of any property to show our allyship of this community and march in the parade and form deep relationships. Wow. And we showed up to that Pride Parade with so much energy, so much excitement, just love and unity for that community. And I'll tell you, 3 years later, every single sports property in Atlanta now marches in Pride. So it for me was a proud moment because I showed and helped to use that team to show that if you show allyship and love to a community, it just can spread. Love spreads just as much as hate spreads, but we have to be intentional about it. Absolutely. And but that for me was my greatest moment.
I love that. I got to ask a quick follow-up. So how did you get this NBA team to embrace? Because historically, it's really difficult for them to embrace the LGBTQ in the past. So how did you go about doing that?
Well, first and foremost, my team was in the middle of a public-facing racial crisis. So we had already a lot of drama and eyes on us.
Yeah.
And I used that moment of being in a tragedy to turn it on its head and make it into a triumph. And I used that negative energy to say, hey guys, let's do something different. I know that we're not used to showing up in this way, but we have no choice but to do things differently. So let's try this, see how it goes. And who knows, we might be able to bring friends along the way, new fans along the way, sponsors might lean into what we're doing, but let's just try to do something different. So I think leveraging the power of a tragedy and turning it into a triumph was the way that I was able to influence the NBA that this was the right thing to do.
I love that. I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said, you know, lead in a way so that others will want to follow. And I think you created a wonderful example there in Atlanta. Come on, Amy, your turn. Tell us about good and worst.
So, well, again, the worst was sort of this revelation about my impotence if the leadership doesn't allow. So I was working in Massachusetts. I was working for a state agency, and I had received the promotion to be an assistant director. And one of the people I was supposed to supervise, I was supervising all men, said to me, "You were only given this position because of your sex and your race. I will not speak to you."
Wow.
Literally, would not say hi, I will not speak to you. And, you know, I believed I was competent, and so therefore got the position, not because of my race or my color or sex, but because I was very doggone good at what I did. But he had made the decision that he wasn't going to speak to me. And so when I would call meetings and he would not show up, and I would, I said, I brought it to his boss, my boss. He said, "He's been here a long time. He doesn't change easily. We're going to just let him be." So he completely disregarded my role, my responsibility, and just said, "We're going to let him do what he wants." So therefore, his entitlement, I was completely impotent in that role. So that was one of the most difficult times because it went on for a series of months. But the greatest time is the time that I get to live now. I have the ability and the capacity to serve as the founder of the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals, a real white male space, financial and legal, right? And the greatest part about it is bringing together those organizations, financial professionals, legal professionals who care about the racial wealth gap. Right. And one of the things that, we always talk about the fact that we're crabs in the barrel, that we operate in silos. So the Association of Black Estate Planning Professionals is that collaborating entity that says, together we're better. That I always say, as an estate planning attorney, I can write the best estate plan, but the best don't have money. And so working with that financial advisor, working with the accountant to make it happen. It is so amazing. It is so energizing to have the power and the greatness of those folks who care about our community to come together. So that's why I said, I got the best life ever right now professionally. Wow. So that's where we are.
That's a very fulfilling life when you think about how you're able to contribute, which had historically been a white male dominated area. So to be able to make that kind of an impact is really important. And, I thought about what you said about the guy that they said, just let him be. And we talk about unconscious bias and the halo effect and how you tend to ignore all the obvious negatives that may be going on. And you place this halo on them and say, oh, no, they're okay. They've always been like that. And that's that fear of being able to address that unconscious bias. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Amy. Okay, so look at our time. We have 6 minutes left, maybe a few more. And I want to make sure that we get at least one more poll question in here because we want to get the audience involved. There's been so much rich information here. I want to ask this poll question here. Think back to a really impactful microaggression, and we've heard some microaggressions here that you experienced at work. What type of microaggression was it? Was it relative to race, age, gender, something about my personal style, sexual orientation, my lack of knowledge about a subject matter, something else, or I have not experienced it? And then slide down to the next question. There are two here. Think back to a really impactful micro advantage. We don't talk about this often, but positive ally behavior. What aspects did the other person affirm for you? Did they affirm your contribution in a meeting, your subject matter expertise, your personal style, how you handled a particular situation, or asserting your point of view or something else? Or have you not? I'm hoping this is not the case. Have you not received any micro advantage or positive ally behavior? Then submit those and we'll get those tabulations going. But while we're doing that, because we're running so short on time, hopefully we'll pull that up in just a few moments. Jeff, don't hate me for moving along. But I want to get to some of these final questions before we move into our Q&A in about 10 minutes. So, Inga, you've had some experience here. What can you share with us regarding, oh, okay, here we've got it. 39% of people said the microaggression was relative to race. I think that's the greatest percentage that we have there. Yeah, 13%, followed by gender at 15%. And then on that second question about the micro advantage, 34% was regarding subject matter expertise, followed by how I handled a particular situation. Very interesting. Thank you all for responding to that. Inga, let's get back to this question for you. So we've had some conversation about some of the issues associated with how we approach several situations. You've had some experience in what can you share with us regarding pervasive microaggressions and small acts of inclusion?
I know it's the stuff that you're not necessarily all aware of or aware of all the time, but they eat away at you. Mm-hmm. And you also know that sometimes they don't even know that they're doing it a lot of the time, the perpetrators of it. And I think that's what makes microaggression so tough, because you can't crack them. And very often you're not even aware of it at the time, and you can't describe it even, how it feels, to actually do anything about it or raise it with an individual. Now, the classic thing, I remember hearing this at a huge event. It was a women's network event, and the CEO of a major insurance company, male, stood up. And he said the classic thing in this meeting, and we were all women, the entire audience was about 300 women. He said, oh, and I'm doing everything I can to support gender diversity in the company. I was recently in Asia, and I met some of the top talent in Asia that are females. And you know what? They're really good, right? Now, we listen to that and we go, what an idiot. I mean, that is exactly the sort of thing that drives me crazy and nuts when people say that. But you kind of feel you can't call him out in front of hundreds of women, because is he such an idiot? Perhaps he's such an idiot, he doesn't really know he said such a stupid thing. And this is obviously all the societal things that come into play and all the stuff that's going through us as individuals. Mm-hmm. So those are the sorts of things I've seen and heard many, many times. But I also remember something, even when I made it to the CEO of Lloyd's, really, which I regard as the pinnacle of my career. There was not the IIS this time, but another gathering, an association of about 80 to 90 of the largest insurance companies across the world. And it's a membership association, and only the CEOs of the groups are there. Now, I was the CEO of Lloyd's. Out of 80 or 90 of us, I was the only female. Every other single CEO was male. Just think about this. Every single one of them. Wow. Now, I was actually on the board of this association, a board made up of perhaps 12 of us. I can't remember exactly. Of course, I was the only woman. Has to be, because all of the others were male. And every time I spoke, the chair, and again, I won't name him, but he was very well known at the time. Every time I spoke, he would cut me off, really cut me off. And you feel that you don't want to say anything in the meeting. I mean, it was really frustrating, but I never really said anything. And we used to have these regular board meetings. Then on about the third board meeting, when he did it yet again, one of the guys sitting around the table, and I won't name him either, but he's a mate now, he actually spoke up for me and said to the chair, I think you should please let Inga finish speaking. But it was sort of, it just goes on and on and on, and it happens constantly. And that's just one example. Even when you're the CEO of Lloyd's, you still have that behavior towards you, and you still don't quite know what to do about it at the time. And it eats away at you, and it undermines your confidence, or really would undermine my confidence. So the next time I went into that meeting, I was almost too scared to say anything. And that's really serious stuff. And this is the impact that some of this has on us.
It is. Yeah, it's a huge impact. And it also talks about the importance of allies, having the gentleman who did speak up for you and say, we really need to let her finish her statement. And I'm going to stop talking because we're getting close to time. Let's go on to Zing. I'd like for you to answer this question. An area that you feel particularly strong about is what it's like being pregnant 3 times during the course of your career and the challenge of being a working mom. Share some of your thoughts and maybe some of the lessons that you've learned.
I love that question. I wanted to really address the question that you just asked to Inga. Can I get 2
Go
seconds?
right ahead.
I know we have to go
Free
fast.
flow.
What I wanted
Absolutely,
to say, what I wanted to say about microaggressions is this. It's time for us to stop tippy-toeing and walking on eggshells for people that are not doing the same for us. Okay, I think that when we talk about microaggressions, we give the people that are microaggressive a pass for the behavior, and we have to stop doing that. We have to call it out when it happens, and it doesn't have to be in an aggressive, confrontational way, but I'll give you an example. To Inga's example of that individual who said that the women happen to be good practitioners. Can you imagine? You know, I've heard that before in the workplace, and my response is always, hey there, you know, diversity does not equal deficiency. Right? So like, you have to educate people in the moment, but it doesn't have to be confrontational. Another example we saw, to Inga's point of being cut off while she's speaking, we saw Madam Vice President during a vice presidential debate in the summer say, I'm speaking. Excuse me, sir, I'm speaking. That. Right? Yeah. So it's not confrontational, but it is being very honest in the moment with the person who is doing the behavior, that what you're doing is not okay. And then lastly, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've been called girl at work. Hey, girl, by grown people. And I'm not a girl. And so I remind them I'm a mother of 3 and a wife, and I'm grown, you know. So in any event, that's how I feel about microaggressions. I feel like I address them when they happen. But to your question about being pregnant 3 times at work, 3 very different experiences. I would say by the time I had the 3rd child, I was a lot more confident in my pregnancy and recognizing that it was okay to take time off if I needed to just regroup or just needed some downtime to rest and relax, right? Your body's going through a huge transformation. I don't have to be superwoman to do my work and to do this motherhood, but being honest about what I'm experiencing. And I don't know that during the first pregnancy, I was doing all of that. I think I was trying to show up as superwoman and show everybody that I could do it all. And it's okay if you can't do it all. You have to take time to heal yourself. So those are just my few key points to share.
Oh, I love that. And I want all of you to feel free to speak whenever you want. And I'm going to tell you this, Margaret, in advance. I'm going to take a couple extra minutes because I want to get through Jennifer and Amy as well. So I'm calling an audible. Hopefully you're okay with that. We'll still keep time for Q&A. All right. Thank you, Zing, for sharing that. Really, I really appreciate that, those additional thoughts on microaggression. Let's go to Amy. So in our prep session, you talked about issues and opportunities associated with how we approach risk and risk mitigation as related to our careers. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Actually, I think Inga and Zinga both spoke to, we are taking a risk, and we have to be calculating our risk, because so often we are thoughtful about how everybody else feels, completely disregarding how we feel, right? But we know it's a risk, but we have to sometimes, in order to be able to break those doors down and break them open, take those risks, because if we don't, clearly someone's going to stay on us. But in this time of Me Too, if we don't, the people coming behind us are going to have to face those same fights. People behind us are going to hear about that there are some good women or some good practitioners, and that they can do whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. And ideally, if we speak, because we know typically other people won't anticipate how we're feeling if they don't, if they're not women, if we're the only woman in the room. But if we're speaking, we're able to compel allies. We're able to bring allies along because then they'd be informed. But truly, we are being mindful of measuring the cost, because we're trying to break those doors. We're trying to do things that people have never done before, but we know that we don't have an option not to.
I love that. Take calculated risks, but take the risks so someone behind you doesn't have to do that. So I appreciate that. And they will take some risks as well. But if you open that door, you make it a lot easier for people to feel comfortable challenging. Jennifer, so here's a question I'd like to share with you. You spoke about an aha moment that was based on a conversation with your chief when you spoke about the importance of being one of the guys. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So yes, this was a conversation I had. I probably had 15 years on the department. I had been newly appointed to the SWAT team, and the highest ranking female on our department, who was an assistant chief at the time, requested that I meet her for a sit down. At that point in my career, I had almost prided myself in being able to integrate as if I were one of the guys. And I think I realize now, especially even more so after this conversation here today, that wasn't an effort to make the men feel comfortable with my presence, which would then have the effect of making me more accepted. So in this meeting with her, she asked how I was being treated. Of course, I lied through my teeth and said, I'm being treated wonderfully. It's great. I have no complaints. Everybody's the best. That was far from the truth. But at some point during the conversation, I explained to her that I'm just doing everything I can, and hopefully eventually I'll be treated like one of the guys. And she looked at me and said, that's never going to happen. You'll never be one of the guys. And I remember being so angry, like, how dare this woman? She doesn't know me. I'm different than her. And I left that day just really furious. Like, how dare she? But as time went on, I realized she was absolutely right. And I was like, I had been banging my head against the wall, trying desperately to be accepted and treated as if I were one of the guys, when in reality, that was never going to happen. And so at some point, I had that aha moment. And I realized I just need to be myself. I just need to do me. And they can take me or leave me. But it was liberating. It was like I found strength in that and power in that, in accepting that I was different then, and that I brought something else to the table that they did not. And so now I find that I use that like as a lever, you know, to again, back to diversity and inclusion. If I'm trying to be one of the guys, then I'm just making it easier for the men to not accept people that are different than them, or women in this particular case. And so that aha moment, it took me a while. Like I said, 15 years into my career, and I had been trying desperately to be one of the guys, and it was futile. It was a futile effort. You know, no matter how hard I tried, it never worked. And so it took this female chief who had been around a lot longer than I had to kind of break it to me. And it wasn't easy to take. It was a hard pill to swallow. But once I did, like I said, it was liberating. And again, now I use that as almost my superpower, that I am different. And in some respects, that being different makes me better. And so I try to encourage young women on the department to kind of come to that realization earlier than I did. Some take longer than others. But yeah, that was definitely like that epiphany, like, wow, I wish I had known that sooner. I was wasting my time and energy on something that would never be.
Yeah. And so many have fallen into that same trap of trying to be someone else or something other than themselves. And I love you said that it's a superpower. And anyone on this line who's ever heard me speak before, I talk about being inimitable, which is being so good and so unique so as to be impossible to copy. And if you understand that that's your superpower, then you utilize that muscle more often. Love that. So we are at about 10 after, and I do want to stop and get some questions in here. And I'm hoping that somehow you'll be able to see all of these comments that have been coming through. I've been trying not to read them because they're all so positive, but hopefully you all get to see them as well, because they've been so complimentary of all of the wisdom that you have provided with us today. But let's get to some of these questions. So The first question that I see here is, what should you do when the blockers or haters are actually the actual decision makers in your organization? Can someone respond to that one?
I don't mind just kicking that one off. I think part of it is getting that power in numbers, because if you've really got some senior decision makers who are the blockers and you as an individual can't get through, I would then go out and seek your allies and get more of you in numbers. Now, what I did, for instance, when I was launching the Dive In Festival, this festival for diversity and inclusion in the insurance sector, and this was in 2015, I knew that there were going to be many of these CEOs as blockers because I knew them. And so what I did was, instead of me taking them on, I actually enlisted a white man who was very well respected. And I actually went to him. He'd never been involved in anything to do with inclusion or anything before. And I went to him and I said, will you please take the lead on this whole initiative for me? Because they'll listen to you and they'll let you in and you can have lunch and maybe you'll have a beer or something with them. But that's how I did it, because I knew that I wasn't going to stand a chance, or it would take me years of banging and getting frustrated. So that's how I did it. And I carefully chose him and then carefully chose some others who I knew could get to those people. And that's how I would recommend trying it, even within your own organization.
Wow, I love that. Using another, or knowing when you need another voice to deliver that message. Does someone else want to chime in here? Yeah, I think that's powerful. If I think about the book by Robin DiAngelo that came out regarding racism, help me, Zing, I'm drawing a blank. Robin DiAngelo. She just wrote a book, and I'm looking in my bookcase here because I said white fragility. There you go. But how she used her voice. There are messages that Zing and I probably could never get across, but her message may have been well received by somebody who will listen to her and may not listen to us on this. Anyone else want to talk about when the blockers are decision makers?
I'll just chime in really quickly. Sometimes we have to remember that the decision makers also have bosses. That's even right. The highest. So CEOs are hired and fired by boards of directors, right? So you have to always understand that there is someone else above this individual who is perceived to be the highest that they have to answer to. And I think oftentimes we get so caught up in what happens between the four walls of the buildings that we're serving, not recognizing that there are investors that this person has to answer to, their boards of directors. And so perhaps there's ways to align yourself with those entities, not necessarily to talk badly about the decision makers, but to help them understand the impact of the work that you're trying to put across the finish line and why it matters, why it counts. I've had to do that many times as a diversity practitioner. I've had to show that there is bottom line impact for us not doing this correctly. When you talk about bottom line impact and you're talking about the color green, right? That's the color that everybody cares about. That's then right. All of a sudden, now your investors are looking at your CEO. Now your board of directors are looking at your CEO. And if that person is a blocker, they might take them out of the way. So we have to look at the whole dynamic when you're thinking about what's being blocked, who's blocking it, and who's above it.
Love it. Thank you, Zing. I want to share with you a compliment that's here. It says, more of a comment than a question. I challenge all of the women on this call to consider running for office, local or state. You are the ones with business acumen and understanding of the impact of policy, and we know how to collaborate and mobilize folks. And another one followed up and said, okay, ask the panelists if any of them considered throwing their hat in the ring to run. Has anyone considered that? And the room goes silent. We'll go on to the next question. Confronting a microaggression seems easy, but what happens when everyone sympathizes with the person who was the microaggressor? Oftentimes they play, I'll read the other part of this, oftentimes they will play the victim and you have to deal with being the angry Black woman stereotype. It's exhausting. So what happens when everyone sympathizes with the person who was the microaggressor?
This is a visual that I keep on my cell phone all the time as a reminder. It says, wrong is wrong, even if everyone is doing it. Right is right, even if no one is doing it. We have to hold ourselves accountable for what is right and what is wrong, even if no one is doing it. So it's okay if everyone jumps on that person's bandwagon and makes them not guilty of their sin. We still know what the truth is, and we still have to hold ourselves accountable as practitioners in this space. And so I would just say, it doesn't matter if everybody takes that person's side. It doesn't matter if you're the last man standing and the lone man standing. Stand on your principles, stand on your belief system, and everything will work itself out in the end. It always does.
And also, as exhausting as it is to be in that position, it's more exhausting to deny who you are. It's more exhausting to live under the guise of biting your tongue. So not only do we have to do it for us, we have to do it for those folks who come behind us, because we have to be the light in the darkness. We don't have the option.
Thank you, Amy. I'm writing all this down. I think I'm writing more than I'm talking, so I appreciate these comments. And I want to get Inga. This person says, please share the story of your aha moment when you also stopped trying to be one of the guys in the insurance industry.
Yeah, and it was actually a non-insurance experience I had, because after my worst experience where I walked out of the office and I got on that plane, I went through several parts of Asia, backpacking on my own. And after about 4 months, I got to Sydney, Australia. And by this time I needed some money, because I said I hadn't planned this trip. I was very spontaneous and I needed some money. And so I needed to get a job, and I managed to get a job as a receptionist. Remember, I'd been underwriting for about 9 years by this time, but I got a job as a receptionist in the BBC's office. That's the British Broadcasting Corporation. So, you know, the Public Broadcasting Corporation of the UK, and they had a big office in Sydney, and I got this role there. Now, what was interesting for me was that the manager in that office was a woman. And I had come from the London insurance market where there were no there was hardly a female underwriter, never mind senior female role models. It never occurred to me that you could be a top woman, you know. So there she was, and I thought, it's amazing. She's the boss, and nobody references her gender. Nobody talks about her disparagingly or anything about the fact she's a woman. They accept her. She's the boss. And in those days, in the city of London, you couldn't walk into the Lloyd's building, for instance, then, wearing a pair of pants if you were a woman. You couldn't wear a pantsuit. You had to wear a nice little thing. She wore pants to the office. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And that small experience, it was only a temporary job for a couple of months while I needed to earn some money. She inspired me, and I said, this is it. I'm going to go back. I'm going to be me. I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to wear a pantsuit to the office. And it was just amazing, because she was my very, very first role model, and I could see what women could achieve. And that was my aha moment.
I love that. I love that. And sometimes you need that moment of clarity to say, wait a minute. Have I been trying to do something I had no need to do in the past? And it kind of makes you go in a different direction. So this next question says, how did you handle, and this is for all of you, anyone who'd like to answer, how did you handle family or friends that felt your success was their success, expectations to pay for their things, etc.?
You know, let me say, one of the things that we are mindful of in the Black community is there's a Black tax. Right now, and it is when we do well, we are expected to contribute as well, right? And I am blessed with family members who are far more successful than I am, so that's not a concern for them for them to ask me to do anything. It could have been the other way around, but it was, as a community, there's an expectation that we sponsor events, that we contribute to things. We all know that is part of the struggle that, you know, Bridget, that helps create that wealth gap, because it's not that we can just make and keep. It is the expectation as a successful Black person that we make and give, right? Yeah. And so we are expected to be community contributors.
I love that. Make and give, not make and keep. That's something that we should all keep in mind. And sometimes it's not giving of financial, but it's giving of advice so that we can empower them to do a little bit better as well. Now, this one says, not my question, but saw it in the chat. And I did see this as it came through. Would love to hear from the panelists. What do you do when microaggression is done by our own people? And that could be women of color, it could be women. But what do you do when the microaggression comes from someone like you?
Okay, because I don't want to be speaking too much. But what I know is a lot of that comes from our internalized depression. For so long, we have been told bad things about ourselves, and we sort of hold on to it and then sort of reflect that out. I would be all deep and spiritual and say that we just need to love on them. But what I will say for real is that we need to make sure that we have our circle of support. Again, just make sure that we are able to have our gathering, our sisterhood that it builds us up. Because as we said, haters will be haters, no matter what they look like. All skin folk ain't kinfolk.
I think we have so many quips and quotes here today. We could write a book together. Thank you so much for that, Amy. I love that. I'm fiddling through these because we got 10 minutes left. Margaret, I don't know if I need to save you a few minutes for a close, but I want to get through a few more questions. You can send me a chat if you'd like. Okay, next question. Career-wise, how do you tell the difference between a genuine turnaround management situation that offers a great career opportunity versus a glass cliff situation where you're set up to fail?
Well, I've faced a couple of those moments. One was the Swiss company that I was asked to go and take on, which could have been a disaster. And the other one was taking on the role at Lloyd's, because Lloyd's, the big thing that I had to do was do the modernization and transformation and put digital into a paper-based market where all my predecessors had failed over decades, and millions had been wasted, millions and millions of money, and the money had been wasted. And so I knew that both of those were very risky. I relied on mentors. I've always had great trusted mentors. And on both of those occasions, I spoke to them confidentially and asked them for their opinion. Because, we find that as soon as you start having a conversation with someone, then the answer sort of appears. And that's what I've always found is so helpful with having a conversation. So both of the times I said yes and took it, was when I had great conversations with mentors.
Wonderful. Mentorship is so important, and having people who can help to guide you through some of those difficult challenges. Thank you. Anyone else want to add to that?
If I may, I noticed a comment up in the chat, and it stated that mentorship is so hard to find. And so early on in my career, I thought if somebody wants me to mentor them, they can approach me, they can come to me and they can ask. And then what I realized later in my career is that maybe they just don't have the courage or the confidence. And so now what I do is if I see something in a young female member of our department, or even a male member of our department, I will reach out to them. And so I would encourage the person that posted that comment, don't be afraid to approach somebody. What's the worst thing they could say is no, or maybe they're at that place in their career where they're not quite ready to put it out there, to be the active one in that relationship looking to give back. And so don't be afraid to seek that person out. And like I said, if they say no, you can just move on. But I mean, you'll never know if you're not the one to kind of raise your hand and ask the question. So have the courage to do that. And surround yourself with people that are successful and are going in the direction that you want to see yourself going. If you want to be faster, then you surround yourself with fast people. If you want to be smarter, you surround yourself with smarter people. So seek out those relationships with people that are going to bring you to that level and take you where you want to go. So have the courage. Don't be your worst obstacle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sometimes that worst obstacle is inside of ourselves. And I love that, having the courage to ask, because sometimes you don't know unless you ask. And sometimes mentors need to be coached as well, because they can get very nervous when you say, I want you to be my mentor. That's a lot of responsibility. So making it easier by coming prepared to the conversation, I think, with here's where I need help. And
Yes.
that kind of helps to guide the conversation as well. Good stuff. Thank you, Jen. Okay, I've got time for one more because Margaret sent me a note and said she only needs a couple minutes, but I want to get this one in here too. Can you share an experience when you've witnessed or experienced a microaggression that you did not speak up about that you might regret? Was this the first and last time, or do you think that picking your battles is the best approach?
For me, I picked my battles because I feel I would be exhausted if I hadn't. And it's about sort of self-preservation more than anything else. And sometimes I've regretted not calling people out on things, but I've done it for my own health and well-being, to be honest, because particularly when you're driving a huge change program or doing a turnaround or something, it is so all-consuming and it is exhausting. And I had to constantly pick the battles just for my own self-preservation. And I didn't regret doing that, although there would be times when I really regretted not speaking up on a particular thing.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. Zing, come on. I see you both putting your
Yeah, I
mouth.
was going to say, I actually had an opposite effect, of not speaking up and dealing with the internal turmoil of what that meant, because I watched that person continue to degrade others and hurt others, and wondered if I had the courage at the time to step up and stop what I saw, if I could have prevented others from being hurt. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I'm not on this individual journey. I'm not about Zing is, healthy and wealthy, so I've made it and I close my eyes and don't look. I can't, once I see something, I can't unsee it. And I think that's what that situation taught me. It's, if you see it, it's, I'm from New York City. Everybody knows who's from New York. On the train, there's a sign. If you see something, say something. Okay. We grew up not seeing that sign in life. And I feel the same way at work. If you see something, say something, because it's going to put you out of your comfort zone for a minute. It's going to, take a toll on you, yada, yada, yada. But it's not always about you. Sometimes it's about others.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And it definitely is about others. And I'm also from New York as well, but that see something, say something just resonates. And we don't take the time, we don't slow ourselves down to actually say something. But we got 4 minutes left, and she said she only needed a couple, so I'm going to steal 2 of them. I'd like for you all quickly to give me a quick tip for people who are looking for ways to find the courage to challenge themselves to choose to be fierce. Can you give us one tip that each of you would give? Let's start with you, Jennifer. We'll go to Amy, Zing, and then Inga. Jennifer?
So I'll share with you a quote that's one of my favorites. I don't know who it's attributed to, but there's no learning without mistakes, and there's no success without failure. So if you don't try, you'll never succeed. So put yourself out there. Yeah, you're going to stumble along the way, but as long as you pick yourself up and dust yourself off, you'll be all right.
Thank you, Jennifer. Amy?
I'm going to reiterate one of the things that Jennifer said earlier. Be the change you want to see in the world.
Love it. Thank you. Zing?
When someone says you can't do it twice and take pictures.
I love it. Inga?
I've always been my most fierce when I'm surrounded by amazing women. So surround yourself with amazing women.
And with that, we will wrap it up. Ladies, thank you so much for being amazing women, fierce women who choose to challenge. Margaret, back over to you.
Listen, as a Southern girl who appreciates a good Sunday dinner, I feel like I've just finished a Sunday dinner with greens and fried chicken and all kinds of stuff for the soul. So thank you, ladies. Thank you, ladies. Magnificent, awesome job. I want to also thank Janet Jordan Foster, who is the national chair for NAAIA. Her wonderful leadership and support has allowed us to do this kind of programming, and the rest of the board, of course. Susan Johnson, who is the national committee chair for programming. Excellent work on her behalf as well. And I also want to thank Jefta Van Donk, who is my right arm and the event planner for NAAIA. So that's the NAAIA folk. I cannot thank the women on this platform enough. Inga, you are amazing. She happened to bump into me on another session that we were planning for, and I looked at her and I thought, this is a fierce woman and we need to have her on this Women's History Month program. Same thing with Zing and Jennifer. I met a couple of years ago and heard a little bit of her story. And Amy, of course, is a friend and a partner and a supporter of NAAIA for Life. And Miss Erica Rivera, we could not have asked for a better facilitator. I put in the chat earlier, you drive this bus and we trust you to do so. We do. We give you the keys and you have them and you made it run. And girlfriend, this was awesome. So thank you to all of you. Thank you for the attendees for joining us this afternoon for this amazing conversation. And let's all still stand in solidarity with the Asian American community. What we see happening in that community is something that should not be tolerated by any of us or by this nation. And so NAAIA stands with them, and I'm sure each and every one of us as individuals as well. All of you have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.